How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Athletes Hub podcast. Today's a solo episode, just myself today. I thought I'd come on quickly actually and just sort of jump on the bandwagon, as they say, and discuss the Neymar debate, which has been circling the football debate world this week. And I'm sure you guys would have seen the clips or the report on the Overlap podcast, whereby Wayne Rooney said that he didn't see Neymar Jr. as a top player. And that then sort of commanded a debate as to whether Rooney was better in his prime than Neymar and vice versa. And I thought I'd just kind of come on quickly and not necessarily talk about the Rooney versus Neymar debate, because everyone will have their own opinions, of course. But maybe just look a bit about Neymar and his career and perhaps whether he was overrated or whether he's actually considered as a top player. I think Neymar's definitely split opinions over the years, to be honest. And for me personally, as much as Neymar has been a great player, I've never really put him on that same pedestal as the very, very best players over the years. I think whether Neymar's a great player, I think that's not a question. I think he's a great player. You look at his achievements in football, playing for various teams in Europe, and also his individual achievements. But when we discuss the very best players that we've seen, particularly in my lifetime over the last 25 years of watching football, I don't really put him on that same level as those players. Again, whether he's a great player or not, that's not a debate. I think that's clear to see. What he's done for his clubs and also at international level, that's definitely there for everyone to see. But I think in terms of Neymar, listen, he's a talented player. And I think in football nowadays, we've discussed the lack of special players in football, the lack of players who kind of put us on the edge of our seats, the players who attempt unique things within the game, whether it's the skills, the step overs, the flicks. Neymar's really the last player that we saw from that generation who kind of was in that bracket of a special player who really. So yeah, Neymar was one of those players who, really the last player from that generation who really grasped football fans, who really attempted unique things on the football pitch and kind of summarized or was put into that bracket of maverick or special talent or special player. I think nowadays in football, we're missing those type of players and those characters on the pitch. And he's no doubt within that bracket. And again, you look at his contribution for Brazil, right? In 2023, he surpassed Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, with the most goals for the Brazil national team. And again, he's won treble with Barcelona, forming that, amazing front three of him, Messi and Suarez. And he's been a great player over the years. I don't think, nobody's doubting his ability. When it comes to talent, he's one of the very best, that's for sure. Technically, one of the most gifted players of his generation, for sure. So there's a lot of positives to Neymar's career. But at the same time, people will flip it on his head and they'll say, well, as much as of a talent this player was, he didn't win the Ballon d'Or, probably didn't win enough Champions Leagues as he probably should have won for the teams he played in. And of course, not winning the World Cup with Brazil. And people often, going back to the Rooney debate, just very briefly, people often said, well, Rooney's not won anything with England, and he hasn't won a World Cup, he hasn't won the Euros. But at the same time, Neymar's not won a World Cup. So if that's the case, why should Neymar then be put ahead of Rooney? Because Rooney's contributions, for his country, again, the goal scoring record, as well as his achievements playing for Manchester United over the years, are second to none. He probably should have won a lot more Champions Leagues than he did at United. Unfortunately, the Barcelona teams that he came up against, denied him that privilege. But again, with Neymar, there's a lot of positives to his career. But I've always looked at Neymar as a player who had all the ability, had the talent for sure, and played in great teams. But when I'm looking at players who really drag their teams to victory, drag their teams who are the difference in their teams as to whether their teams are successful or not, I don't put him in that same bracket because, again, we go back to his time at Barcelona, right? He had a great time there. Him, Messi, Suarez performing that frightening front three. They won the Champions League in 2015. And I think with that, as much as we're not going to overlook Neymar's contribution towards that team, I think that's clear to see, right? He had Messi and Suarez next to him. And I think those two alongside him really helped Neymar to be successful at Barcelona. And again, we're not taking anything away from Neymar. He was phenomenal in that team. The midfield they had in the front three. I mean, in Europe, there were very few teams who could match that. Obviously, Madrid had Bale, Ronaldo, Benzema, but that front three of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar really frightened teams around Europe. So there's no doubt he played his part in that. But then when we look at his time when he went to PSG, no, he went to PSG because PSG for a very long time wanted to win the Champions League. Winning league for PSG became the norm there, and we didn't really assess PSG's success based on how many times they won the league. I think that was a given. Most times they had the strongest team in the league, but the Champions League was the one where they wanted to win, and that's why they brought in Neymar. That's why they brought in Mbappe. But for so many years, it just didn't happen, right? And of course, they got to final in 2021 and they lost to Bayern Munich. But I look at situations like that and I think to myself, the very best players over the years drag their teams, right? They drag their teams to victory. They're the difference in their team. And when it matters, you step up and you make a difference to that team and you get your team over the line. Now, you can go back to Ronaldo at Man United when he won the Champions League in 2008. Of course, Messi winning the Champions League many times with Barcelona and being the difference in that team. Winning the World Cup with Argentina in 2022 and being the difference in that team. That final in 2022 of the World Cup was sensational. And Messi essentially dragged his team to victory in that tournament, in that final as well. Look at Benzema when he won the Ballon d'Or, when he single-handedly dragged Real Madrid to victory. And that was an Asian Benzema. That wasn't a Benzema of the 2010s, or the mid-2010s. That was an Asian Benzema who got his team over the line in that as well. I'm looking at Kaká. Kaká, my favourite Brazil player. In that AC Milan team, his peak was frightening, and he dragged. He should have won the Champions League in 2005, but again, Gerrard dragged his team to victory in 45 minutes, plus 30, plus a penalty shootout. But Kaká really was a difference in that 2005 Milan team and that 2007 team that won the Champions League, right? So players have to they've got to be the difference in their team to whether their team wins or not. And I think as much as Neymar had the talent and had the ability, I look at the key moments in games. Again, going back to the Benzema example, PSG played against Real Madrid in that season's Champions League, and Madrid essentially came back and beat PSG, knocking them out, and Neymar played in that game. Those are the games you've got to turn up in. Those are the games you've got to make a difference. And they're very best players who are up there, right? Not just ability and talent, but have that elite mentality to drag their team and be the difference in their team. That's where you step up, and that's where you make a difference in that team, right? So again, didn't lead his team to enough honours, the major ones. Barcelona, again, he had Messi and Suarez next to him. PSG didn't win a Champions League there. And with the Brazil team as well, didn't win a World Cup with them. And again, it's not all his fault. I think sometimes in a major tournament, you need luck. You need things to go your way. But again, I go back to it. The very best players, win. They win, big trophies. They're the difference between their team winning it and their team not winning something. So again, you're probably thinking, well, without Messi and Suarez next to him, is he going to be that guy to lead his team to a championship? The guy to lead his team to a World Cup? The guy to lead his team to a Champions League? These are the players that we associate with being difference makers, the very best. And of course, Neymar had a lot of injuries. We can't forget that Neymar had a lot of injuries throughout his career, and therefore, wasn't able to, I guess, carry on his peak for a long time. But at the same time, when he had his peak and when he was playing for those certain teams, there wasn't enough in there in terms of him being a difference maker and him actually, being regarded as one of the very best players of all time. When it comes to talent and ability, there's no doubt there. But would you really put him as one of the greatest players of all time? And again, you go back to that Brazil team that I mentioned before. You've got the likes of Rivaldo, who was amazing in the 2000s. You've got Ronaldinho. I mean, that he speaks for himself. Of course, Pele the same. And as I mentioned before, Kaká, right? Now, you look at Ronaldinho, and Ronaldinho is often compared to Neymar, but I think Ronaldinho is just a different breed. This is a player who went to the Bernabeu and got a standing ovation by the Real Madrid fans for his performance there. That does not happen. Of course, Pele winning the World Cup. Rivaldo was really integral. As much as Ronaldo got the plaudits in the 2002 World Cup, Rivaldo was just as important. Again, I've mentioned Kaká as well, how great he was during his peak at Milan. These were players who won major trophies and were the difference in their teams. And again, as Neymar has had no doubt great contributions towards the Brazil team and his achievements there. Again, surpassing, excuse me, Ronaldo with the goal contributions. That's great, and the stats are there, right? But at the same time, when it comes down to him being put in that same bracket of those players who delivered a World Cup for Brazil, are we really going to put Neymar in that same competition? Again, in the 2022 World Cup, they lost to Croatia on penalties, and that was disappointing. We go back to 2014, where Brazil couldn't make the final after losing to Germany in that humiliating defeat in Brazil in the 2014 World Cup. I don't think Neymar played in that game, but at the same time, it just didn't happen for him in Brazil throughout that period. So again, there's no question as to whether Neymar is talented, that's for sure. But I go back to the Brazil team. When we rank the Brazilians over the years, like people of my age, right? When we look at the Brazilian players we've seen over the years, again, these players in this graphic here, but again, I've not mentioned the likes of Roberto Carlos, Cafu in there as well, who again were integral, probably the best fullbacks for a long time in the world, actually. They were just as integral and great players who played at Milan, Madrid, amazing footballers, of that generation in that period. Where does Neymar really rank in terms of that list? Again, Neymar's ability is second to none. Again, he's one of those players who I look back on and I think, he had it on the pitch. He was special. He was a maverick. You don't see in football, you don't see stepovers now. You don't see people flicking the ball over people's heads, right? But Neymar had that. He was talent-wise, ability among the very, very best. But when we look at his achievements, major achievements compared to his ability, is there a case or there's an argument to say, well, he didn't really achieve much in his career, or did he underachieve? Was he people calling him overrated? I don't think that's fair. Again, I look at Neymar and I think that he, ability-wise, is one of the very best players that we've seen, right? But at the same time, you always associate the very best players with those who win major trophies consistently, Ballon d'Ors, who drag their team to major honours on a consistent basis. Look at Messi, Ronaldo, how many Champions Leagues they've won. They've both won something at international level, right? They've won the Ballon d'Or multiple times. That's the benchmark. That's where you need to get to, right? And of course, again, Neymar had injuries, so we can't forget that. And I think that's probably derailed his career. He's gone to Saudi Arabia, he's played there, and it's not necessarily, I guess, he's not really lit the world on fire there. But again, it's a different Neymar. It's Neymar who's had injuries, and the Saudi league isn't necessarily the benchmark for top quality football there. But Neymar, again, is a talented player. There's no question. Ability-wise, fantastic. He's among the very best. But the debate is always going to remain as to, could he have won more Champions Leagues? Why didn't he win a Champions League with PSG? Why couldn't he win the World Cup with Brazil? But again, these are really difficult tournaments to win. But at the same time, when you have the opportunity and you've got those chances to win it, that's where, again, players take the game by the scruff of their neck. They drag their team through it. Those are the very best players. And as much as he's got talent and ability, there's a case to say, well, he didn't really achieve it that highly or that much as he should have done. You look at the likes of Ronaldo and Messi, who are different beasts in terms of mentality, performance, and achievements. Those two are the benchmark. Would you put Messi? Would you put Neymar in the same bracket? Would you put him in that same category as those two? Ability-wise, you'll say yes. But when it comes to mentality, when it comes to achievements, when it comes to being the guy in your team that drives your team and wins trophies on a consistent basis, could we really put him in that same bracket? And people mention Rooney, again, he didn't win a World Cup, this and that, but Rooney was an integral part of Man United's teams for years. At a very young age, he was carrying England at tournaments, didn't win a tournament with England, but was almost the difference in 2004 at Euros. If Rooney doesn't get injured, do England win that? There's a high chance they do. Again, 2006 World Cup, get sent off there. So Rooney was an integral part of England's team and also United's team throughout many, many seasons. Winning multiple league titles, winning individual honours, top goal scorer at the football club, his goal scoring record with England. These are players who, again, when it comes to being the difference at the very top, these are the players. People might say that Neymar's been treated unfairly, and again, he's been criticised unfairly. But usually, when it comes to footballers that we put as the very best, you talk about the Mount Rushmores of football. We always look at their achievements. And if you're a great player and you've got a history as being one of the very best players, you have to have an effect on the game that people can't not recognise, whether that's the World Cups you won, whether that's your individual achievements. You need to be, or somebody who revolutionised a certain period of football, you need to be in that conversation. And there's still a bit of a question mark as to whether Neymar is in that conversation. Again, when it comes to ability and talent, there's no doubt. That's clear that he's among the very best. But when it comes to his achievements and the effect he had on his team on a consistent basis, I think that is still a bit of a question mark. But again, it's all about opinions. Football's all about opinions. And I'm sure you guys will have your opinions. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think? Do you think Neymar was overrated? Do you think he was, you think he achieved what he could have achieved in football? Do you think he underachieved? Let us know in the comments what you think. And as always, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and also X. And of course, it goes without saying, please continue to like and subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate your support very, very much. I hope you'll like and subscribe after my take on Neymar. But listen, we appreciate your support very, very much. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.